Yeah. And that the subject is a kind of it's a British pop star, isn't it? Sort of Beatles.
Well, and all that happened at about the time that those exact same things were really happening, with the Beatles going, or at least George Harrison going to India, and Ravi Shankar getting being a kind of teacher or a guru for them, or for him anyway, all that sort of thing, and that's where we got the idea. Well, the idea came from in another way, but it ended up being like that.
Yeah. So it's again, it's as a theme, it's this idea of, say, the European and the Indian, the interaction between the two, and tradition.
Yes, but this was the opposite side of the coin, wasn't it? I mean, Shakespeare Walla was about well, it was European culture that was really being given, they thought, to the Indians to absorb and appreciate, whereas by the time of the Guru it had turned around the other way, and it was the English and the Europeans who were coming to absorb what was Indian, in the way of music and art and spirituality, for instance.
Yeah. I think now it's probably going in both directions all the time.
I think so.
A much more kind of dynamic relationship. Are there any other questions?
Well, I enjoyed it very much. It was a film I liked a lot. It's the only Indian film that has ever had a commercial, if you want to call it Indian. It's the only Indian film that's ever had a commercial success in the United States. A real commercial success. I mean, everybody saw it. Of course, it won the Academy Award and all that kind of thing. No, I mean, he made it in the way he should have made it, and it was terrific, I thought.
It's interesting you mentioned the United States, because I would imagine that in the 60s, India was almost invisible as a kind of entity to Americans. And, you know, you had Renoir making The River, you had Marguerite Duras, India Song, you had kind of the British relationship still alive, but Americans looking at India is quite an unusual thing.
Well, there's just, I don't know, there just wasn't, it was a hard sell. I mean, for instance, Ray's films, most of them, certainly came out in the United States in art houses, and were highly appreciated by, I mean, they had audiences, but they were not big commercial successes. And none of our Indian films ever, not even Heat and Dust, which was a big success everywhere else, had a real, a wide commercial success in the United States. I mean, they were, you know, they were much appreciated and well reviewed, and most of them, but not, they didn't until Slumdog Millionaire.
Yeah. Oh no, see, in America, I think there's always there's more of a history of sort of looking at China and understanding China of the Asian countries. But maybe that's changed in recent years, because there's been quite, you know.
But I don't think that's especially true. No, not in terms of film and so forth. Yeah. It's only with the rise of you know, Chinese filmmaking and in recent years, say in the last 20 years, is that people have gone to see those films, but there wasn't not a real.
Yeah, yeah. I've noticed that there's been an increase in immigration in America, hasn't there, from the subcontinent that perhaps wasn't there before,
yes,
where you had the Chinese community.
We now have two Indian governors in the United States. One was just elected last week, this week in South Carolina, and then we have Bobby Jindal in Louisiana. So.
Any other questions?
Well, after we made The Householder and Shakespeare Walla, then I wanted to make films in New York. I mean, New York was where I lived, and Ismail was happy to do that, and we attempted to make films set in the United States, and we were unable to. Though we had a so-called 3-picture deal with Paramount, it never worked out. I mean, and they were not for Indian films at all, but for other. One was a New York film with a story about psychoanalysis. And anyway, those didn't get made. And then at about that time, the whole thing happened with the Beatles and the Maharishi and all of that, and that seemed sort of interesting to 20th Century Fox, and they wondered whether we could come up with a story, and we had a sort of story, and then we went to make The Guru, and that's what we really wanted to be in New York, but then we were lured back to India to do 2 more films, and slowly we started making films in New York. And then we made a lot of American, not a lot, but quite a few American films. And then Heat and Dust, we went back yet again. And finally, I suppose through the reading of E.M. Forster's novels and the reading of Henry James's novels along the way, over the years, we then landed in England too. And I can remember the very first day on the set on A Room with a View in England, and I had just worked a month in Florence on the film, and that felt fine. And there I was sitting, well, not sitting anymore. I was in a street in a village in Kent, and I asked myself, why am I here? What am I doing here? Why isn't someone else doing this? It was my first real English film, and I thought, why am I here doing this? And but I went on doing it.
But such perfect evocations of England, though. The films here. I mean, Remains of the Day, for example, is that the characters and the settings. And as we're talking about this, I'm thinking of the film that we've just watched as well, with its grand settings of these grand palaces, and then the way you handle the grand country houses of England.
Well, yeah, well, they were pretty different things, though. I mean,
in what way different? I mean, I know, on the surface, but.
Well, for instance, when we made Remains of the Day, that was that kind of life was in full-blown thing. This was by the time we were doing Life in the Palace in Jodhpur, that life was fast running out, and the Maharajas were being deposed. Not deposed, but they just got rid of Royal India altogether with one stroke of the pen of Mrs. Gandhi's, and that Remains of the Day was all in full glory or full blown thing, but by the time we were on to the whole subject matter of Royal India, and in another film, of course, I think we get into it much more, which is an autobiography of a princess, that it was a kind of disappearing thing, and so
that's a film I think we have to show at Asia House.
I think that's one of our very, very best Indian films. Now, Jinny Beven, that's an interesting story. When we went out there, she came along as a sort of companion and a helper for Peggy Ashcroft, because Peggy Ashcroft was then about 70, and she just thought she needed someone to kind of help her and be there and do things for her and so forth. And so Jinny Beven came out in that capacity as a kind of... and she was very young, yeah. And then she had her huge... and ultimately became our costume designer in later films. And not that much later either.
Question about Ruth Grubler.
Well, in some films not. I mean, there's some films there's hardly anything we've ever made that she didn't have something to say about and provide some sort of advice or friendly criticism and that kind of thing. But she wrote most of our screenplays. Yeah. Including the last one, City of Your Final Destination. She wrote that as well.
You're still making...
I have a new film. It hasn't come. It has not opened here yet, and I assume it will. It's now playing in Italy, all over in Italy. It's playing in Australia. I don't know why nobody's taken it up yet here, but they will. It's a film we made in South America called The City of Your Final Destination, and Anthony Hopkins is in that also. Laura Linney, based on a novel by Peter Cameron, an American novelist. It's a present day, it's not set in the past.
Do we have a date for a theatrical release?
No, we don't. I wish we did, but so far we don't.
Yeah. Now you've made, how many films have you made?
42 or something.
So
that includes documentaries and TV and stuff.
So almost one a year, which is quite a work rate, and you're still
pretty much, yeah,
making films. Now, your style, I think, is known as it's very much known as being a non-forceful style, if you like, compared to a kind of Hollywood where the audience is constantly being kind of manipulated and driven, if you like. And I feel that your style is a style where you're given these beautiful, quite slow-paced effects, and you're left to sort of watch and feel the narrative unfold, and you're given time, which I really like that aspect in your style. And interestingly, I was talking to Sangeeta Dutta, who's a filmmaker who's just recently made a film called Life Goes On, which we showed as part of our program about 6 months ago. It's just about to have a UK release, and it's a British Indian production. And she also actually has that style of a very, not having cuts the whole time, and holding the shots and having a kind of middle distance. But I think the way we look at images now has speeded up,
Definitely, definitely.
And I wonder whether your filmmaking has changed now because.
Well, it's funny. I mean, I go to see a movie like The Social Network. Has that come out here yet?
Yeah.
Okay. And I thought it was absolutely just the most smashing movie, and the way it was done. But I just don't tell those kinds of stories, and my stories are much more about. That was also very much a film of human relations, but it was, quite a different kind of thing. And I've always liked films really about more intimate kinds of films about people, and that seems to require a certain amount of time to absorb, I think. And I think I'm still affected by the way that Ray shot his films. I can see it in my own films sometimes. I'm not aware of doing it, but later on I think I would not have done that way if I hadn't been such an admirer of Ray's films and his style of filmmaking, and I weren't so much aware of his films, because I know them so well. I've seen all of them and see them and re-see them and so on. And that's still with me, and I guess always will be.
And in that respect, Walter Lassley, his photography is beautiful in the film we've just seen, and then there's Subhatra Mitra, who you mentioned. Do you go in and tell a cameraman what you want, or do you let them?
Oh yeah, sure. You work everything out.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really start that way. It really starts with the actors. You go on the set, and with the actors, you work out, because our sets are always they're there. You have to use them as they are. They're rooms in real places. They're seldom on a sound stage or anything like that. They're always there. They have windows in certain places, doors somewhere else, fireplace, sofas, and so forth. And we go into those rooms, and then the actors, they have a certain amount of dialogue and a certain amount of business that they have to do in the room, or maybe it's not a room, it could be some other location, but anyway, they have to do, and they show me what it is they would like to do. And slowly, they find a way that is that they like, and that I like, and that the cameraman can light, because that's important. He's got to be able to light those shots that they're going to do certain things in. And it's all improvised, actually. It's an improvised thing.